Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at waveforms and understanding what they are going to sound like. How do you make meaningful moves on these waveforms? So I look at these and, like, how do I make sense of what I'm seeing here? And this was a question because someone was watching me use the additive engine inside of Citrus. You can like draw in your harmonics and get these cool looking shapes, but then how do you know you're making meaningful moves? Now, I'm going to tell you right now some ways to do this. But understanding processes is way more valuable, but it's sort of a little confusing to understand. So let's go ahead and just look at this, but I highly recommend learning the processes first. So what do you mean? How does this work? Okay. Here we have a sine wave, right? That's the fundamental tone. It's the loudest tone, usually. It's the fundamental tone. The lowest tone is almost always the loudest. And as I add in tones, the tones that are closer to my fundamental wave are going to alter the character of the sound the most. If I make moves up here, sure, I get this, but check it out. It sounds almost the same, with the exception of now a really high annoying tone. So what does that mean? That whenever we have these itsy bitsy waveforms, these are like, you can see them visually because they're so tiny, they can fit on the waveform like a bajillion times. They just fit a whole ton of times. If we get rid of them, you can see this. So what we're looking for here is we can identify two major areas of the wave now. We say, oh, there's this big version, and then there's like these tiny versions. And we can still see the big version with the tiny version sort of imprinted on it. So, and you also notice that this gets very high very quickly because this is like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's like somewhere in the range of 8 octaves above where this original tone was. So if we play high enough notes up there, we'll end up getting aliasing. And if we can actually turn on oversampling to try and get rid of it, and it leaves the audible spectrum. Like we can't even hear that if we play high enough notes. So that's something that we need to be aware of. So when we look at this, we say, oh, okay, so these guys are really high frequency. So if we play lower notes, we'll hear them. And you see them popping up down there. But if we play a higher note up, they go a much further distance away because of the nature of the note that we're playing. So, because these are harmonics, they're based on the harmonic series. This is not a linear relationship going on here. So when we play a note down here and a note up here, the distance between the harmonics is going to get way bigger. So let's go ahead, if that makes any sense. So like if we were to play a note down here, we have like harmonic 1 and harmonic 2, right? Let's just make it like 1 octave. So this actually is an octave. So that's 1 octave above because 1's 2, right? So we've got our octave. So if you play a really low note, they're actually going to be really close together because you have far less. So if we had like something, for example, that was like 2 hertz, the octave above would be 4 hertz. But if we went to like 1,000 hertz, the next octave would be 2,000 hertz. So, and with this scheme, this is what I'm trying to say is these guys will go out of the spectrum way faster. Why do we have options all the way up here though? Well, if we're playing lower notes, sure, that's a thing. And we could get into things like Algun has some really interesting ideas about this as far as its synthesis engine is concerned. I don't own it though, so I don't use it. But what's cool about this is an FM synthesizer. So I can use these curves to do FM synthesis. So I know if you go watch my Learn FM Synthesis series, I know that like something like this is going to offer a crunchier texture. And if I change the ratio to be just so, because now I'm using this as a modulating signal rather than one that I'm going to hear. That's pretty much, I'm going to leave it at that. You can go, it'll make a lot more sense if you go watch that series because I delve into that and what these shapes potentially mean. Like it's really straightforward when you go through there, but it's a lot of information that I just can't cover in one video. Now let's talk about this from the additive synthesis perspective and the subtractive synthesis. So I'm sent sounds all the time from people who want me to try and make their sound. And one of the hardest parts is nailing these first few guys because these first few harmonics are the ones that are like the most important part of the sound. They're the most audible and they're always going to be sitting really close to the fundamental. So depending on if I play higher notes or lower notes, those are going to be the ones that determine the character of the sound. So what I will do is I'll generate a sound along some method I thought they used, but then I will alter these first ones. And half the time I'm not using an additive thing like this, or I've sent it through a series of complex forms. So what I'll do is I'll pull open an EQ. So let's just create like some sort of a sound, right? So we have this sort of a sound, whatever. And you see we get this sort of buzzy formanty sound. We can even do some phase shifts, whatever. So that's what we have. And I want to change the character of the sound. I'm close to whatever sound I'm going after, but now I'm missing that extra little thing. Half the time, it's some sort of a phase relationship between here, and I just can't get at that because I've gone through these processes. Maybe I've gone through a couple wave shapers. I've just done something complicated. So what do? I open up an EQ, and that allows me to alter the volume, and sometimes if I have an extreme cutoff, it'll actually even do a phase shift for me. So what I could do is I could play a sound, and I look at this and I go, there's some really loud stuff here and here, and by simply doing something like this and maybe changing this, I could try and get at whatever it is I'm trying to get at and alter the character of that sound. The problem with this method is it doesn't move. It stays with whatever it is. So if you have something that can emulate key tracking, or not emulate, if it's got key tracking, that'd be kind of a cool thing. I could try and write some sort of an equation to follow my stuff around. Or I could, if I'm playing one note and I'm trying to nail it at that one note, which is normally what I end up doing because it's the most simple, but it's the least flexible, then I can nail the note the way I want it to, but that means I didn't nail the process they used. So, there's a whole bunch of gives and goes and trades, but sometimes this is it can create these huge dramatic differences. If you just go through some of my sounds like videos, the more recent ones are the ones where I get much more into this. You notice that this is something I begin to do. The reason why I say processes are really important is because, sure, you could come in here and draw waveforms and try and get real fancy, but eventually you're going to go into post-processing, right? So eventually this is going to go into channel 27. You're going to go through an EQ. You're going to go through a wave shaper and check it out. So we have this. Just became that. What did we just do? Well, we used distortion, and that generates a whole new harmonic series. So just toss everything you just did over here out the window as far as being able to look at the waveform and know what it's going to sound like. It's more useful to understand the process, right? So now it sounds like that. It's like, what is this thing doing to whatever we gave it? And so by altering this, we can change what's happening here. But then after this, how do we alter it further? And that's where let's come at it with an EQ. And so we look at it in an EQ and we say, let's try doing something like this. You see, that's a huge difference. And this, I'm hitting it at different volumes, and this wave shaper is not linear. So let's go to a default patch and do something maybe like that. A little more easy to understand. We could just, you look for, now the fundamental. You come in here and you just begin to get the timbre you want. When you're going for timbre, it could get really dicey on how you make these boosts and these cuts, and do you move them? That's where you throw phasers and flangers. It's really important to understand what exactly you're doing to the sound. And again, my sounds like series is where I try and kind of do stuff like that. I guess it's got some good examples of this in action. So when I'm looking at this, that's basically my notes. I say, look at high frequency content may not be audible, but at the same time, in this case, I'm playing a rather low note, so it'll be very audible. And you just sort of take mental notes of what it sounds like. If I'm going for a triangle wave, I know it's going to be a particular form, but I know that if I mess with the stuff down here, that's what's going to alter it the most. If I go to my triangle wave again and then try and mess with stuff up here, I'm playing high notes. Let's go to. It doesn't do that much up there. It depends on what I'm doing too. So you see the lower and the higher, that makes a big difference as well. But anyways, those are just some notes. So really high frequencies, but you can still see there's a very separated gap. It's very easy to see. If we fill in this gap, you see that these get higher really fast, but we get this more narrow looking thing. And then if we mess with the low end, we see that this begins to flatten out, and it becomes just this high frequency stuff, which gives you those high buzzy timbres. When you just look at stuff like that, it's what it's going to sound like. If you play it down a couple octaves, it'll give you a much more gritty texture. And from there, and it's also going through a wave shaper, which isn't helping my example right now, but if we go ahead and play this, and 27, did I just mute 27 or something? Did my audio engine just quit? What just happened? Or did my MIDI move? I think my MIDI just moved. Yeah, it just moved. Okay, so that's what it sounds like. Not that far off from that. Just louder. This is softer. So anyways, you just get mental notes. That's pretty much what stuff that looks like this is going to sound like for the most part. You can get similar sounds if you do things like the skew, because, well, not sounds quite like that. it's a little more narrow. But if you were to convert this to sine harmonics, you can see all this stuff is low. And then as soon as you just add in a couple of highs, you get that sense of it. And if you go lower, it's more audible. It's pretty much what's always going to do. So as you understand this, you can do that. Now, if we want to adjust this sound dramatically, just take out the fundamental or the first two, whatever. So these are going to be the guys you're going to want to touch. Phase shifts are also really important too. Because it changes the way the whole signal is going to sum later on down the line. So you're going to want to be aware of those as well. But anyways, those are some reasons or notes that I take when I'm doing stuff. It really depends on what I'm going for and the idea I have in mind of like, oh, maybe I'm going to try and do this with this and that. And I combine a couple ideas, get, creative. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope this was an answer to your question. Subscribe and have a blessed day.